Good morning. So welcome everybody. We were talking about the snow. I know it's varied across the state and some people had nothing. Ferris has nothing. And I think Mount Pleasant, we were on the border, and Brian has been home for 2 days or got 2 days off, snow days. So hope you're all warm and have warm beverage as we get started today. So we just want to welcome you. We know we have a couple new members. We welcome a new person from MDE, but they'll introduce later. And just to remind you, your team is, I'm Jennifer Clem. I'm from Central Michigan University. I am currently the chair. And then Susan English from Aquinas College is the chair-elect. And Beth Fighton is from Oakland, and she is the treasurer. And Brian keeps us together with all the technology support, and he's from Eastern Michigan University. And so some news, we've had, this is our third meeting, our February 4th meeting, which is virtual, and we had hoped we could be at Hope College on April 8th for an in-person conference, but we have decided that that will also be virtual. Doug's going to talk to you a little bit about the Hope Conference and how, what we're going to do instead and why we made that decision. But just so you know, the last meeting of the year will be virtual, just like these. And it is on April 8th because the 4/15 was Good Friday. Okay. We have some DARTEP business. So give everyone a few minutes. We have to approve, we need to approve the minutes from DARTEP on December. Everyone's had a chance to look at those minutes. And can I get a motion to approve the minutes from December?
I make a motion.
Thank you, Lisa. A second?
I'll second.
We had a second. Did you get that, Susan? How do we do this? Do it backwards. So all those, let's, if you approve the minutes, be silent. If you're opposed, say nay. All those in favor or opposed? Okay, minutes passed. And then real quick, Brian, just a note that in April, we need to elect our chair-elect for next season, or next year. Susan will be the chair next year, and the chair-elect will need to be from a public institution. So just putting that on your radar to think about if you're interested in serving, or if you want to nominate someone for that, the chair-elect position, we will be voting for that in April. And we are to Beth's treasurer's report.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Happy snow days for those of you that have been able to enjoy those. Yeah, it is definitely pretty outside. So like someone said earlier, I've really been enjoying just the beautiful view that we've been able to have. Quick update on our dues and membership. All institutions have paid all or part of their membership, so we are doing really well with that. Our balance for January was $13,973.78. If you need to add additional members, you are welcome to do so. We only process checks at this time or direct deposit, so you're welcome to contact me for further information about that. A quick update from our last meeting, we had talked about the fact that we were trying to register with LARA, which is the Michigan Licensing and Regulatory Affairs Department. We have to update some names on that. So we had submitted our filing, but discovered we had to resubmit it. And so we are still waiting for the snail mail to deliver that back to us. And once we have that all set, we'll be able to update all the bank account names with our current executive board members. And as a reminder, in June, our contract is going to be expiring with Merchant Services. Those are the services that we've paid for to allow us to take your P cards for membership dues. And we'll determine at about that time if we want to continue with that or collect dues using some type of a virtual terminal to process those credit cards like Square. That concludes the treasurer's update.
Okay, before we do organization reports, any questions about DARTEP business? Okay. Let's go to organization reports. And we have, we're going to combine, Doug is going to do the Mde update and also update us on the Hope Conference. So we're going to combine those.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Doug Brashler. I'm the accreditation director at Hope College, for those of you who don't know me. And over the last 15 or so years, Hope College has always been sort of the go-to place for our April DARTEP meeting and for an accreditation conference a couple of days prior to that meeting. As you heard Jen say in the introduction, we were so hoping to have that be a face-to-face meeting this year, but because of some of the restrictions that the hotel was placing on me as I was getting ready for registration and things, everyone would have had to have made a commitment to the conference by the 1st of February in order to get the block room rate, which was a little bit of a savings for all of us. And at the time when I had to make this decision and shared it with the committee, was just about the time Omicron was just absolutely exploding in our state. And it just didn't make sense to continue forward with a face-to-face meeting. So even though we're hoping to see, COVID numbers go down significantly and go down as quickly as they came up, it just, at the time when we had to make decisions, didn't make any sense. So before I go any further, I'd like to have everybody use the chat and say thank you to just an absolute wonderful group of people that have been still planning a virtual meeting. Gail Linton, Catherine Wygen, Gina Garner, Jen Clem, Joe Lubig, Beth Kavitsky, Ray Francis. They have just been above and beyond, the call of duty, and using the information to still put together what I'm about to describe for you, which I think is going to be an absolute cool event for all of us. So I want you to put your continuous improvement, growth mindset, quality assurance hat on for just a second, and I want you to think about all the things that are happening in the state of Michigan. We've got new programs coming, which are going to require new assessments based on core teaching practices and the clinical experience changes that are out there. And there's the new 5-year window that MDE is asking us to start collecting data on, and your site visit for accreditation. And I could go on and on and on. What a time to get together and get all of a collective state idea process worked out. And so that's the event that we're planning on. So I want you to write down April 7th, the day before the DARTEP meeting. And I'll describe what we're trying to put together for you. So the morning session, it's going to be virtual. The morning session will be sort of an information gathering time for you and your teams from all the EPPs around the state. We're hoping to have conversations surrounding the data collection that MDE wants us to do, the data collection that is required because of our accreditation, the data collection around our new programs. And we're hoping as a committee to put together a template for you so that based on when your next site visit will be, when does all this stuff have to be put together? And so that's just an absolute huge part. So we're hoping that you and your team can join us at about 9 o'clock in the morning. You'll get a whole lot of information in an email from me a little bit later, but about 9 o'clock in the morning, MDE will give us some presentations. Maybe the committee will talk about a few things, but you'll be able to work with your teams then once that morning session is done. And we all know that about 2 hours on Zoom is about as long as we can stay committed to looking at a screen. And so think about 2 hours in the morning. think about then breaking away for a while and taking with your team, your assessment team, your accreditation team, the information that you've just gotten, formulate a little bit of a plan in the late morning, early afternoon, lunchtime, and then get back on a call for breakout sessions. And let me just tell you a few of the breakout sessions that we're planning. Because accreditation directors seem to be shifting and new people keep coming in, how about an accreditation 101 from Gina? How about Chris Schramm talking about OSU's new CPAST, which is the clinical experience evaluation tool? How about reliability and validity of all of our new assessments, especially those assessments based on core teaching practices? How about completer data and what's available from MDE? How about engaging faculty in continuous data review and assessment? We're planning all of these different breakout sessions, and so you'll be able to take your team and send them out to different areas, different rooms of the Zoom in order for that to happen. And I apologize for my phone ringing in the background. So that's the mid-afternoon session, and then a wrap-up session to end the day to make sure that all your questions are asked and answered. So that's the kind of day that we're planning, April 7. Sign it up. And the great thing is, I'm not going to charge you anything. Not like CAPE, not like AACTE. I still can't figure out why we got to pay for virtual meetings, but we're planning this awesome event. And again, just myself, I'd like to say thank you to the committee as well. I'm going to put my my email in the chat. And if you've got a question or a conversation that you would like us to consider as a committee, send me a quick email about the topic that you'd like us to include. So that's the day. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time. But otherwise, you've heard me long enough.
Any questions for Doug right now? Like you said, he has his email. You can email any of us. And yep. Mike, what did you put in the chat?
Yeah, just to support what I'm going to talk about next.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so after all the thank yous, which are well deserved, we're going to talk about more bad legislation, as Joe was indicating.
Okay.
So that's part of my update. Yeah, okay. Just so anxious to talk about these wonderful things coming out of our legislature. So my name is Mike McDonald. I'm the president of the Michigan Public Education Deans Group, and along with Marcia Federer and several others on this call, we've been dealing with a few things since I last reported out. The Michigan Public Education Deans have not met since the last DARTEP meeting. Our next meeting is on the 2nd of March. But in the interim, we've been dealing with a House Bill 5685 from Pamela Hornberger. To that end, I've put in the chat that particular piece of legislation, and I'm also going to now paste in the bridge article that accompanies it. If you really want your stomach to turn, just bear with me here while I, there you go. So some light reading for you. Basically, this bill is talking about the allowing uncertified student teachers to teach for up to a year to quote unquote address the current teacher shortage. Needless to say, there are a number of issues at play here, and we're all trying to deal with this on a case-by-case basis and have our own responses to this. So I won't go into that, but other than to say that I will be meeting with Pamela Hornberger.
People from Michigan, I mean, if you...
Question?
If what?
Somebody needs, you have a question? Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. sorry, I thought there was a question coming in, and please. So this legislation is the one that would allow uncertified student teachers to teach for up to a year. Many of us see it as unnecessary. There are currently provisions for teacher of record or long-term subs in exceptional circumstances where there's appropriate scaffolding and professional support. But I don't think I need to elaborate to this group the concerns that we have that derail the kinds of quality clinical experiences that are appropriately scaffolded, that we've all designed and abided by CAPE standards to institute and have approved, only to have something like this come along that sideswipes us in some unique ways. So needless to say, this particular representative who proposed the bill did write to our university president, Oakland University president. We worked with our legislative aide, and several of us on this call are going to meet with her on Tuesday and voice our concerns. So I'm happy to receive any additional feedback you wish to share. Joe Lubig, Beth Kabitsky, and I were on joint email with Dan Hurley from Masu yesterday. So we talked about this, and I'm happy to represent the challenges that this legislation poses. And bottom line is that MDE has voiced opposition to this bill, and I'm assuming most of us in the sector will as well. So if there's something you need me to say to Pamela on Tuesday, I'm happy to share that with her. So I'll end there, and next time we meet, I'll have more, because we'll have had a Michigan Public Education Dean's meeting in the interim.
Any questions or comments for Mike? Yeah. Okay, is it my pie? Is that how you say it, Susan? I always
that's usually how you say it. Michigan, the independents. So for anyone who's new, the Michigan Public Deans is about half of the institutions, and then the other half of us are independents. So we have a it's a very different organization, but anyone with an independent, a non-public institution is welcome to participate. We've not had any meetings this year, but we would like to schedule something for late spring, April or May. So if you have had changes at your institution that we may not know about, please email me. I'll put my email in the chat in just a minute, so that you can send me any email addresses so we don't miss anyone at the independents. We have not convened, but Lori Burgess and I kind of co-lead this group. Lori's on sabbatical this semester from Cornerstone, but we will be reaching out to our independent organization, MICU, the Michigan Independent Colleges and Universities, regarding legislation. Kind of wanted to wait to get an update from the MDE today, and then we'll reach out to Robert next week. So that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan. Any additional questions or comments before we're a little ahead of schedule? I'm hoping that all of our teachers of the year are here. And I'm not sure who from MDE is going to introduce. Take over.
Good morning.
Here.
Good morning, Dr. Clem.
Oh, Jennifer's here. Hi, Jennifer.
I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
Good. Glad you're here. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I am Jennifer Roble. I am the manager of the Recruitment and Recognition Unit in the Office of Educator Excellence in MDE. And I have worked with several of you, and I do appreciate the opportunity to have our voice here again this year, to have a conversation with you all. And I believe a few of them are on the call. I know Sheldora and Casey I saw. I just wanted to, there they all are. In Region 10, Janine Scott is representing Region 10 again this year. The Regional Teacher of the Year that was chosen for that position left teaching in late August, early September. So Janine graciously stepped in for us again, and she is a rock star ambassador for DPSCD. I wanted to thank Sean Kaki and Gina Gardner and Bridget McDowell and Darcy McMahon for talking us into doing this again. Thank you so much. And if I know that the RTOIS had several questions for the deans and directors. And so if I wanted to start off by asking the regional teachers of the year, if that's okay, Dr. Clem, a starting question, and then have them kind of take over from there. And then please jump in with questions or concerns that you have for them, and hopefully they'll give you some great feedback. So my first question to the RTOIS that are on the call this morning, what is one thing or what are several things that you wish you would have known going into your first year as a classroom teacher? Maybe what do you feel like you could have been better prepared on both your end and maybe the Ed Prep Institute's end as well? Jump in, Leah, I see you.
All right, I was like, it's hard when we're on a Zoom call like this. You don't want to all start talking at once. Good morning, everyone. My name is Leah Porter. I am the Region 6 Teacher of the Year and the Michigan Teacher of the Year this year. And I know that we all appreciate so much having the opportunity to speak to all of you. So just for context, I went to MSU, and back in 2004, I did my internship full year, and then went a year without a job, and then began a year later in teaching kindergarten. And, for myself, I had a pretty rich experience in my prep program, but there were several pieces that were challenging the first year, specifically with how you deal and interact with families and parents. And when you're dealing with challenging situations, both behaviorally or being able to advocate for kids and the needs that you're seeing when you haven't necessarily had those experiences. That was for me, at least in my first year, one of the most challenging elements that I found going into the classroom for my first year of teaching.
Hi, my name is Casey Hook. I am the Region 2 Teacher of the Year. I teach currently in Roscommon. I hope you guys are enjoying the snow. We actually missed everything up north, so hope you guys enjoyed your snow days. We're a little jealous. I went to Saginaw Valley and graduated about 7 years ago. I did a semester long in the Saginaw area and got a job in a charter school, worked there for 2 years, and have been at Roscommon for the past 6. So I would have to agree with Leah, definitely communicating with families and just how to communicate, what's the proper way to communicate is definitely a huge thing that's lacking. I think something that many teachers still struggle with, even without the teacher prep program and however many years, is time management. I don't think enough of that is advocated for or talked about in teacher prep programs. Especially, I loved SVSU's. We had a very rich field work leading up to student teaching, and I had some great experiences with some great host teachers. But the lesson planning, grading, communication, the responsibilities that districts ask of teachers is varying, obviously. But definitely you want to be involved, but then you just don't know where to expend yourself sometimes. So that was a huge struggle, I think, the first couple of years. And I think it's an issue for why we are losing a lot of teachers is they feel very overwhelmed and stressed. So that time management piece was huge. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Janet Swarthout. I'm Region 5 Teacher of the Year, and I'm from Carroll, Michigan, where I've taught for the last 34 years, and I have 40 years of experience. Right now, I currently am mentoring 2 of our new teachers, and I can tell you they struggle the most with, as both Leah and Casey said, it is their time management would be their number one that I am seeing, and how to deal with parents. They don't seem to be as well prepared for how much actual work teaching is. And it is a lot of work these days. We, just as you have all these new rules and regulations, so do we. And they don't seem to be as prepared for how much time it's going to take them, and also how to carve time out for themselves at the same time. I see them getting burned out, and I have to remind them consistently that they have to take time for themselves and take care of themselves, or they will not be able to help their students.
Hi, I am Sheldora Haynes, and I teach in Bridgeport in 3rd grade, and I've been teaching since about 2001. Laid off, callback, laid off, callback, laid off, callback. I'm the Region 4 RTOY, and I graduated from Saginaw Valley. And to echo the sentiments of my fellow RTOYs, all of those things, check, 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 true, true, true. But in addition to that, I think I probably would have benefited a whole lot more from a workplace culture type class or something, navigating whether I want to be a part of a union and the pressure that you get from that kind of thing, which meetings you should attend, which shouldn't, which ones you shouldn't be a part of. I guess it might be common sense, but I think that if I would have had more information or more education surrounding workplace cultures, because I know it differs from district to district, but even building to building in a district. But just how to navigate some of those without creating, not that I have, but without creating hostile work environments and those types of things. So that I think would have helped me. And a lot of the new teachers that are coming in, like my colleague said, they don't know how to navigate it either.
Can I jump in here? I'm Region 3. I don't know what the prompt was. I've been having technical difficulties and had to wait for my students to leave. So I'm going to let the next person go, but I do have some input as soon as I know what the prompt is.
Teresa, the prompt was, what is something that you wish you would have been taught or learned before you stepped into a classroom? What maybe is 1 or 2 things that you wish you would have known?
Okay, I can definitely have input in that. But ironically, this is going to be something that I also received input on from the 2 teachers that I am currently mentoring right now as first-year teachers. And that is how to be a co-teacher, but not in a special ed, regular ed situation. How to simply be a co-teacher to a co-peer, right? That communication piece that is so important, regardless of the fact that a special ed teacher is traditionally a co-teacher for making accommodations and modifications for the curriculum for access for all, but just working with another adult. It's not always the supervisor teacher, student teacher relationship isn't always a co-situation. And so when they come here and they are in a co-teaching situation, and I remember this myself, it was very hard to understand how that relationship worked and how the communication should efficiently work to make it best for all.
And so maybe a follow-up question for the RTOYs, the difference between going into year 2.5, 3 of a pandemic, what would be some things that you would tell your intern teachers or your teacher candidates that you oversee or mentor, the differences between pre-pandemic and now and post-pandemic? What would you say to them, or what would you say to EPPs, EPIs to help them focus maybe more on those specific things with all the other things that they have to do?
I'll start it off. I actually currently have a student teacher from Saginaw Valley, and I love her to death. She is absolutely incredible. And something I've really talked a lot about to her are some of those things that are obviously in our world of education right now, the social emotional learning piece, building relationships. And then also we've really been talking about that executive functioning and how much it is lacking in our students right now. And how do you teach executive functioning? That wasn't taught in our teacher prep programs, or even how to teach self-management, self-regulation, those kind of cornerstones of SEL. And those are huge things that these kids are lacking right now. I mean, we're seeing we're seeing academic gaps, which you know is going to happen when we're in a pandemic. And we had teachers, I know Leah was virtual for over a year. Luckily up north we weren't, but I teach 6th and 7th grade English right now, as well as real world skills. And I've had my 7th graders since 4th grade. I've looped with them, and I am seeing some of their behavior that we kind of eliminated, or the executive functioning that they really learned in 4th grade is starting to fall off in 7th. And that was never taught to me. So it's been a lot of learning on my own, a lot of leaning on my mentor teachers, and leaning on other people in my districts who have some of that experience. But I see that across the board of teachers in all areas really struggling with how are we teaching our kids to behave again now that we're back in school after they've had all this time off? And how do you do that at different grade levels or at different age ranges? Because it's going to be a lot different in kindergarten than it is in high school. And I want our kids to be successful. And so my student teacher and I have really been working on adding that into every single lesson. But then again, in your teacher prep programs, how can you do that? The only other thing I thought about what Teresa and kind of Sheldora said about what teacher programs should do, looking at contracts. I never looked at a contract in my teacher prep program, and that can be really hard. And like, how are contracts negotiated? A union versus a non-union, a charter school versus a public school that has a union and a bargaining agreement versus a charter school where you're doing it on your own, and how to properly advocate for yourself and how to read a contract and what you're obligated to do and what you're not obligated to do. So sorry, I added that last bit in. Thank you again.
Casey, I would echo the same sentiments. Working in an elementary building, and the first 2 years of the pandemic, I was teaching kindergarten, and then now I've transitioned to 3rd grade. So it's been interesting seeing the same students that I had in the last normal school year now in 3rd grade. And one of the hurdles that we're really seeing right now when we're thinking about, the number of years being impacted by the pandemic is not only the academics, which are vast. And I think that's really challenging for new teachers when they have the Common Core and the pressure to maintain pacing and curriculum and things like that, but understanding that so many kids have so many academic needs, which is typical in a year anyway, but it's so much greater right now, depending on the ways they were able to learn, and knowing and learning how to adapt and modify curriculum. I think that if you don't have good mentorship in your team, when you come into a new position, that can really make or break those things. And understanding too that the classroom is really about knowing your students from an academic and a personal sense, because in order to meet their needs. And I think that's something that is challenging for new teachers, because they don't have necessarily maybe the expertise or the confidence to do those snap judgment decisions on how they're going to help support kids in need, especially when they have the pressures of standardized testing and the like. And so, we're seeing a ton of that. And another thing that we're seeing is, when kids are grappling with the curriculum at a higher grade, but they have not had the social experiences, we're seeing that across several grades in our building. Our 2nd graders didn't have a full year of K. Our 1st graders had almost no experiences that would help to start to develop that social emotional learning, the ability to work together. And so we're seeing a lot of fallout in how kids are communicating, their behaviors, how they can handle curriculum that is more rigorous as they're getting older, because they haven't had those capacities to do those maybe in person or to the same level of rigor that they would have done, especially if, in my case, we were home for over a year and many kids didn't come back when we did return. So many kids in our district specifically were out for 18 months. And so it's just helping to train teachers in how to be adaptable and have the ways to think outside of, here's the curriculum. Yes, I am, required to do certain things to the Common Core standards and to the elements of the district, but understanding too that we won't make gains for kids if we don't meet them where they are, both socially, academically, and emotionally.
I think adding to that, the liquid that is going to seep through all the pebbles that have already been put out there is helping kids understand the why of education. Right? I live in a middle school world in a tunnel vision way, but I think that can transcend all grade levels. We're seeing, they didn't dislike their life being home through all the virtual stuff, right? They had other ways to enjoy life and thought, okay, this is pretty good. So now I'm coming to school and school's hard. And you know what? Why do I need it? And I think that we all need to help them get back to that point of valuing education for their own self, their self-growth, their self-worth, and their future. The why for, and maybe even the why for teachers, because sometimes we have those days too, that's like, oh, why am I working so hard at this when those kids don't seem to be working so hard at this? So we need to get back to the why for all involved.
I also wanted to add to what my colleagues were saying, that our ability to transition, because some of us go into teaching thinking, oh, I'm just going to be in the grade that I'm in. And there are huge groups of teachers graduating from institutions thinking, oh, third grade is where I'm going to stay. And when I think that, well, especially when I graduated from Saginaw Valley, it was, I'm going to be teaching kindergarten for the rest of my life. And that's not what happened. And my ability or inability to transition effectively, like I'm expecting them, my middle schoolers, to behave like kindergartners, or my kindergartners to behave like middle schoolers, or my third graders to behave like fifth graders, etc. I mean, and that transition happened to me not just every couple of years. It was like one year I was in third grade, and then I went to 6th, 7th, and 8th grade math. And so to be able to make that switch, I think even pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, beginning of teaching, middle of teaching, I think that would be valuable for pre-service teachers to learn or experience during their pre-service time.
Janet, do you have anything to add? You're muted.
I think my colleagues have pretty well summed it up. It's getting students back into the routine. They got out of the routine. I know I teach at the high school level, and my students were used to staying up all night and maybe getting up at 3 in the afternoon. And so making that switch back to regular hours, there is no routine anymore. And they resent the fact that they have to get up in the mornings, even though I remind them in the real world, when you go out to work, this is what's going to happen. But they don't seem to get that yet. And so.
Can I add one more? Oh, I'm so sorry. Can I add one more thing? It just popped in my head as I was listening to everything. And I talked a little bit about it before, but I know this is a conversation that many of the RTOYs we've had and we know we're experiencing, is that the pandemic has brought a collective trauma to all of us, and is also, many of us had more simple, easier bouts with the, dealing with the pandemic. We had all the things we need and things like that, but kids experience so much trauma over the course of the pandemic, be it maybe the loss of a parent, or not having the resources they need, or being away from school, which is their safe place. And while we always had kids with trauma, that piece has just exploded in the last year, because there's so much more, and we're all dealing with collective trauma as well as we continue to navigate this pandemic. And I know that in my own training, that a lot of those pieces of hardship weren't highlighted in that way, and really trying to put yourself into others' shoes, and giving grace and empathy to situations that you don't experience yourself. And I think that is so critical and valuable in this landscape of time, as we're navigating so many divisive topics. Children are experiencing so many adversities. We are just in a time in education that is unlike any time I've been in, and I would argue probably any of us have experienced in our careers. And so I just think, helping students to understand how to help support those needs, but also to be able to take care of themselves at the same time in order to maintain the ability to give of yourself, but also where you're, able to continue to maintain this career, which I know we all care deeply about.
So with that said, Leah, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but maybe talk about what some of the challenges and or strengths are that you see from your early career colleagues who are in your buildings. And then maybe the second part of that is those who finish their training during a pandemic and only have that to know, they've only learned that kind of training. And then the discipline issue, I mean, those in our district, the district that I'm in is through the roof right now. And that's just because kids don't know how to behave or just live or just be. And so it's kind of the third part of the question. You touched on it a little bit, but maybe if the others could talk about it a little bit. So strengths and challenges that early career colleagues are facing because they only know the pandemic.
One of the challenges that I see in 2 first-year teachers right now is, I don't know if it's an inability or just a hesitation, or fear of reaching out to parents. They are absolutely panicked at the thought of having to communicate with parents. But yet, as a 30-year teacher, the most success I've had with students is always with the parent together, right? We have to team approach it. So it's very, very difficult for me to understand why these teachers coming out of college right now don't want to contact home. And I know that we don't always get response when we contact home, but it's always the first step. So we've tried, start with some positive phone calls, and then, we can work towards those ones where we have to approach a delicate topic of behavior. But I think more practice and scenario practice in college classes. One of my young mentees, he said, I would have loved to have more simulations during those, 6 to 9 p.m. Thursday night classes that they have to go to during their student teaching. Like, set up a panel with some current teachers who are willing to volunteer to play the role of a parent, and then we can dramatize what that phone call would be, because just saying this is what you would say isn't the same as going through it.
I think a strength that I've seen, especially out of the student teacher I have now, and younger teachers, is their ability to adapt. Something that I've really noticed, and it's something that we've all kind of had to do as educators, is move and grow along with the ever-changing world of education, which we know is ever-changing to begin with. But of course, the pandemic brought a whole new aspect to it. One thing that surprised me was her lack of knowledge in Google Classroom, as well as some of those tech tools that are so vital to how we now have to teach. Like in my district, that it is a requirement that everything is on Google Classroom in case we have quarantined students, so that we can send home a Wi-Fi pack and a Chromebook, and they can still have access. And that's a lot of learning. I know it's another thing. I know how well SVSU does. I am a big proponent for their program, but that was a big surprise of how much coaching I've had. And she asked me, she's like, where did you get the learning? And I was like, well, it actually came from fellow teachers in our district. Someone was really well at it. And so they did PD when we came back after 2020. So definitely the challenge with the types of technology that we have to use: Remind, Blooms, Google Classroom, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Cami, Pear Deck, like all of the tools that have been incredible to use as an educator who has to go between virtual and in-person, or even doing both at the same time. There's a lack of knowledge there. But again, the strength is being able to adapt and learn and grow as they're continuing on, having to constantly change in their field.
Okay. And then what kind of mentoring do, in the 5 of your opinions, what kind of mentoring do the new certified teachers really need to be successful? And then on the other side of that, what supports do the mentor or supervising teachers need to support new teachers?
I think the mentor teachers need time. I wish I had the time to go into my teachers that I'm mentoring into their classroom and watch them teach. Watch how they relate to their students, watch how they instruct, so that I could either give them some advice or give them some tools, get them some direction into how they could best improve. But as I'm teaching full time, I don't have the time to go into their classrooms. So I think if our administrators would give us the time to go in and really work with those teachers. I meet with mine regularly after school, before school, at lunch, whenever we can get those few minutes in, but it's really not enough to give them the support that they need. I feel like I'm more their cheerleader than somebody who's mentoring them at this point because of the time issue.
Janet, I just had a meeting with my superintendent about this week, and I coined the term, and not that it's revolutionary, but live action mentoring. We need that live action mentoring without me having to write the sub plans for somebody to cover my class, because the offer is there well, just let us know when you want to go in. We'll get somebody to cover your class. Well, that's not going to help me be able to help her with my emotional capacity and mental capacity to look at that objective. We need live action mentoring time.
Think about coaching cycles. As a mentor teacher, I had to do a lot of that learning on my own. If there was some coaching cycle, professional development, luckily I have a great instructional coach that kind of has helped me through student teaching and the mentorship of teachers that I've done the past few years. But without knowing that coaching cycle and how do you approach when your mentee or your student teacher isn't doing something properly? How do you have those really hard conversations, like Teresa said earlier, with a co-teacher or with someone that maybe they're not putting their relationships or that trauma or that at the forefront before they communicate home or have that conversation with the student. Those are things that I was never taught. And it's really hard as a young, newer teacher myself, going into that situation and trying to have that tough conversation of, you really can't do this in your classroom, or these are areas that you really need to work on to improve. I also think that our student teachers need more time. It's great for our mentee teachers. They need more time to go into other classrooms. Yes, it would be great for me to be able to go and see my mentees as well without having to create subplans, but how much we learn from each other, like your next door neighbor is your best resource. And I don't think there's enough of that observation, even not even within your district, but within your ISD, having those experiences, not just within your classroom or your own grade level, but across the board.
That observation needs to happen after they're out of that student teaching, because if those observations are happening when they're still in their higher ed program, then they don't have the background or the place to hook what they're seeing, the new information they're seeing. They don't have that, oh yeah, I remember when that happened. Oh, that's how she or he handled it. Oh, okay. So they need a place to be able to hang that new information they observe as well.
Okay. And then how about some barriers that you all or your colleagues face in pursuing continuing ed or additional endorsements, and how can the higher ed programs help you hone in on your craft? Don't everybody jump at once.
To be frank, time and money. I mean, to be 100% honest with you, what has got in my way of continuing to my master's degree, which I am just starting to apply for now, is having the time and money to do so. As I said, I recently graduated within the last 10 years. I still am paying off student debt from my program at Saginaw Valley, and to then continue to add more loans on top of that, or there's not enough resources for teachers who are currently teaching to get scholarships or grants as much as it is for some of those things that are now incentives for people to go into education. So those are my barriers. I look for the free PD. MDE has a great Michigan virtual that they throw out there that I use a lot for sketches. The sketches are great. Districts can provide sketches and things like that for that type of development. But unfortunately, what's from not going to an institution or even a Michigan institution and looking at a virtual format is the time and money.
Even if you are able to go or have the money to do conferences or things like that, often it's getting the release time as well from your district or your classroom. I know we went through years of where schools had no money at all. So it was basically you had to take your own personal time or take unpaid time to go to conferences, pay the fees out of pocket, which makes that really difficult because, I have been lucky to be able to attend some conferences over the years. And they're dynamic and fabulous and help to really provide community with teachers across the state. They help you connect with other people. You can learn and grow in ways to bring things back to your classrooms. But that is and now of course with the sub shortage, even if you're able to potentially go, if there's nobody to cover your classroom, in my own district, it was, you don't go to that. If we don't have sub coverage for you, you're not going. And so, that's also very difficult when you then have, of course, built sub plans and all the rest and then are unable to go. It is just very difficult for teachers to have that opportunity once they are in a classroom. Having a slightly different lens with being a more flexible position this year, I have been able to, go to even other districts and go into schools and things. And it has been so incredible to have that opportunity. But when you are in the classroom, you are very limited in being able to actually be gone, because it's not only being gone, but it's also the work of all that to be gone as well, if you have subs and support from your district.
So
something
Leah,
that sorry.
Teresa, I'm sorry. This is Joe Lubig from NMU. So just I was encouraged to ask this question by Jennifer. So what you all are talking about, again, we all are smiling on the inside, if not on the outside, is how critical the mentorship is, right? Mm-hmm. And so we get really concerned about legislation like a bill that's being proposed right now to just, hey, you're the student teacher, we're hiring you, no mentor, no support, you're it, go get them, right? And just how maybe we could all, because we're writing against that and saying, please don't do this. It's bad. It's a bad idea. But it's, I think what you all are talking about is we're still refusing as a society to resource what we know needs to be done. And then we just keep giving everybody more to do. I mean, Teresa, your comment is real. Mentoring programs, I was in one where the mentee and the mentor never got substitute teaching time together. They had it doesn't make sense, right? So it sounds like we're on the right track opposing that kind of legislation that just throws somebody into the ocean and gives them one water wing and says, good luck, go for it, right?
Absolutely. So yes, I would. I had a full year student teaching experience being from MSU. And I think, obviously your mentor teacher is critical in that, but I had an incredible mentor teacher that put so much time in me. And then I got lucky enough to get hired into a position where I was on a kindergarten team with two of the best mentors on the face of the planet. Just happened to get luck of the draw when you get into a team, so they were just willing and excited to help me grow. And I also was in a district that had a great mentoring program for the first 3 years of teachers that allowed a certain number of days out where I could go observe with my mentor teacher in our own building and across our district. And that was incredible. But I know that is not the case for many. And, and that cycle of mentorship is so key. And even though, we talk of education being a collaborative profession, we have stripped away so many of our abilities to be collaborative with not only our colleagues, across, schools, but even within our own colleagues and our own grade levels, our own content areas.
Yeah, to add on to what Leah is communicating, the legislator is trying to fix the teacher shortage, but it's going to create a larger teacher shortage down the line. I mean, we have the research that proves that mentorship programs have a higher percentage of teachers that stay in education. So without that, we see like, what is it, over 50% drop out in their first 5 years of teaching. If I was a student teacher and I was in my classroom by myself without that even semester or year-long experience, I would have left education. And I think that's something that we as RTOYs are trying to be better at communicating and coming from that front of a collaborative of unit coming forward and saying like, this isn't okay. But unfortunately, the legislator continues and tries to say, we're going to do this to end the teacher shortage or curb the teacher shortage, when in reality, we're going to see even greater percentage of numbers not going into education 5 years down the line because of the things that we're chopping down at the knees.
It also seems to me too that it demeans the profession of being a teacher and the time it takes to develop that craft. And, you know, people that are making these decisions that are not face-to-face with kids every day, that are not working with teachers every day. And I think because everyone goes through schooling, they think they have the lens of what it is like to be an educator or in a role in a school. And it is just so totally the opposite of that. And so it's frustrating when, you know, legislation like this comes down where it feels like it continues to demean the profession.
Great, thank you, everybody. I think Alam is on the call, and I wanted to give her a minute or two to ask a question about culturally responsive teaching. So and get the feedback from the RTOYs on that. Is Alam on, or is she still having technical difficulties?
No, I'm here. Thank you, Jennifer. My computer decided to restart, and it did. I couldn't stop it. Thank you so much for all the feedback. I'm wondering what your experience has been with identifying and practicing culturally relevant, culturally responsive, culturally relevant pedagogy, whatever you refer to it as during the years that you've been teaching. What has helped? What can you share with the APIs, how to best approach it with candidates, specifically those that don't come in with very much experience with working with diverse communities? Thank you.
Well, first, it's going to begin with what your district is going to, in my opinion, when you're first stepping in, is what are your district's priorities in those areas? Many districts, I know at least in my greater county and community, have had prescribed curriculum at the elementary K-6 level for some time, which then, you know, so it's that balance of clearly this is not meeting the needs of all of our students when we're, you know, using a prescribed curriculum and we have, you know, a very different set of children in front of us. But I think it's the advocacy piece of working within your district to push for change. It is reading and getting the experiences of understanding others that are not yourself. And I think that's a huge piece of it, is that, you know, when I look at the demographics and we look at the demographics of teachers across the state, we know that they do not mirror our communities. And so, you know, it is our responsibility as educators and as responsibility of our districts to provide professional development that help us grow to be able to be culturally responsive in our teaching each day. And I think that's the first step, is that, you know, because we are local controlled districts, you're going to see such a wide range, and it's going to depend on where you get hired, but it is that advocacy piece that is so critical.
I would caution that a new teacher has to be careful and learn to know their community as well. I'm in the Thumb area, and we are not very diverse, and we just started a club for our lesbian, gay, LGBT group, and it has not gone over well within our community. And as we teachers try to support those students, we also have to be aware that our community then starts actually attacking teachers at board meetings and things. And it's hard, you know, you will have to prepare your students to get to know their communities. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't go ahead and, I mean, I'm old enough, they can't get after me, so go ahead. But some of these young teachers, I don't know if they could handle the verbal attacks that will be made on them. And so we have to prepare sadly, we have to prepare our students for that.
It was really eye-opening working with Leah this year. Her district, I have to say, has done some incredible work in cultural responsibility and response. We actually I was just a part of a district network meeting this morning with our district, and we were talking about our values, and one of our values listed was diversity. And we really talked like, do all of our staff value that? Do we have the education to value that? We're not taking it off because that's going to create a larger thing, but are we doing as educators, as a district, what we need to do? And the answer was no. And the leaders in our building were like, we don't know where to bridge this gap. The state is pushing and doing incredible work, but living in Roscommon, like Janet said in the thumb, it is very conservative and very undiverse, to be blatantly honest with you. So how do we get from here to here? And how do we do that with the community and with everything else? So definitely it's a lot of learning on our part. It's being brutally honest with ourselves. It's accepting responsibility. It is advocating and learning more, not about your community, but also just about your students in general, and making sure that we don't just have, I remember when I went through my programs, you had like 5 kids that you had to differentiate each lesson for. That's unrealistic. Like I differentiate my lesson for 32 kids in every single class, pretty much. Like each kid has to access that education differently, and each background from each kid is different, and how they access that information because of their background, their culture, how they speak is different. And it's my job as a teacher to make sure that I am doing everything I know to learn about them so I can give them that equity in my classroom. But unfortunately, we do have a very diverse state, and across our state, our districts are all over the map, and we need to be doing a better job fixing that problem.
One thing that I just recently learned that I didn't know that was pleasantly surprising is we had a new hire literally who just came in last week, straight from a December grad. And she did her student, and she was GVSU. She did her student teaching in Battle Creek and received, I don't know if the word is stipend, but she received compensation to relocate in living expenses to be able to go into an inner city school there and get that experience in a student teaching experience. I think one way for us as teachers, especially starting out, to be able to accept diversity is to be immersed in it. And if they can get more of those diverse experiences prior to signing that contract, no matter what district they're going to be in, I think they bring that experience and positivity from their pre-teaching to be able to help the districts look at it through a different lens. We help them grow depending on the culture of their district, because it is so dependent on what the culture of your district is already. But those pre-service teachers, if they could be immersed in it more often. I was so pleasantly surprised at this young lady, and the first thing she said is, well, this is not Battle Creek, but I have what it takes.
Thank you for the feedback. I appreciate in noting each of your responses. Clearly, we're on a continuum between one district and another with regards to readiness. And so therefore that understanding, or that need to identify where the district is at, staff is at, and plan to work together with the candidate. And we cannot skip immediately to being immersed in diversity without first recognizing our own readiness. So clearly we've got work to do, and it can be done, but we just need to recognize the growth that we have reached and applaud it, and keep that mindset of we're going to get there, and we're not there yet, but we'll get there.
I really see that journey as lifelong for me. And I think most educators would feel like that, because I know over the last even 2 years of working on my district's equity and access team, the number of times that I have felt like I know nothing. I need to continue to do my own self-work too. And I think that is a piece that is hard when for many, as we're trying to change minds and change the perceptions of teachers, is that reflecting on yourself and the things that you have experienced or done in the past allows you to continue to grow. It doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a person that knows that we can always do better for our students. And I know that my mantra has always been that we need to do the best for the kids that are in front of us and the community that we have. And that is our responsibility in this profession.
Thank you, Artois, and I'm sorry, I apologize. Alam is our new consultant in the Ed Prep unit, and she'll be introduced during the MDE portion of it, the updates, but I just wanted to get that in there. Sarah Kate, thank you for reminding me to do that. I'm like, who doesn't know Alam? But I appreciate that. So welcome. I thank you for asking those questions.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Okay, so we've talked a lot. Does anybody else have any questions for the Artois?
I have a perception question, maybe like, Janet, you mentioned just the, what new more seasoned veteran teachers, right, can maybe withstand the verbal barbs and accusations and misinformation, but it still is hurtful. I'm just wondering how is your administration or are your school boards seeking out to learn about these issues, or is it a mess? Like, are the school board meetings just a mess and yell fests and then nothing happens afterwards? Like, we're really up here really wondering how the Michigan Association of School Boards could be more aggressive in educating elected officials as to who's knowledgeable about these issues and how these processes work. Just wondering if anybody had a comment on that.
I will share that at our last school board meeting, we had parents, because they're only allowed to speak, 3 minutes, in tandem, one after another. They read the Communist Manifesto to our school board members. Our board meetings are unhealthy and vicious, and I doubt if anybody who is currently on our school board will ever run again. So it's kind of a reflection of where our community and is at this particular juncture.
I will say that my district's board are incredibly supportive of initiatives for equity and accessibility and supportive teachers. I know that we have had pushback from our community in different pieces, but they have been incredibly supportive of moving initiatives that will help support all of the kids in our district. We have been fortunate that it hasn't been as extreme in terms of public comments and things like that, but our board seems to have a pretty thick skin, as does our admin, to push the initiatives that are important to help support and see kids.
I'm not sure. I see Cynthia and Sally have hands up. I'm not sure which one went up first. So Cynthia, you want to go?
Sure. I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit back to Sheldora. You said something earlier that a couple of you picked up on, and I'm curious because it reflects a virtual conference I was in earlier this week, that we are creating more community-minded schools. The conference I was in was pushing it away from the one teacher, one classroom model and having teams of teachers working together in community in their schools and breaking down the walls of classrooms, and what the implications of that were for teacher preparation. And it spoke in that earlier conference that I was in this week to a lot of the comments that you were all making about learning to work with your colleagues. which I would imagine would include conflict resolution, right? Because that's part of learning to work with our colleagues. It's team building skills, it's and such. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are for us. What would that look like in our curriculum? Because I find it fascinating that isn't a part of our standards. There isn't a lot of attention placed on that in teacher preparation. We don't have classes in working with your colleagues. But that might be really new work that we need to start thinking about being more intentional with. And if so, what would that look like?
When I first made that comment, I thought about it and was like, well, maybe this is kind of elementary. Maybe I should have learned how to do that in high school, or maybe I should have learned it in previous work experience. But when I thought a little more, teaching is unlike any other profession in the world. And so, yeah, like you said, we have to be more intentional. Now, what that looks like, I mean, it can be a variety of things. I know that there are schools in parts of my region that don't have walls and that you can hear the teacher next door. I know that there are, in my building, the other 2 third grade teachers that are on my team, we join each other's classrooms on a regular basis for a math lesson or for a social studies or a science lesson, or we trade and look at each other's reading rounds. Again, like my colleagues were saying, it's a lot of work to prepare to do that. But as a college prep course, I remember at Saginaw Valley that we had to work in teams in one of our field placements. It's not really a vivid experience that I remember, but and I think it wasn't vivid because it just scratched the surface of whatever the lesson was supposed to be. I mean, I know how far or how deep can we really go if we meet 4 times in this one teacher's classroom over a semester or for 4 weeks or whatever. But yeah, maybe my colleagues have more insight.
I posted in the chat really quick, looking at establishing professional learning communities within fieldwork classes. Never knew what a PLC was until I got to the district I'm at now. And looking at, that's where a lot of our collaboration comes from. That's where we're analyzing data, whether it's academic or now we have an on-track graduation system that has like a credit score for students that is analyzing attendance, suspensions, changeable factors, non-changeable factors like a death of a parent or sexual abuse or neglect, looking at their membership within the community, looking at all of these different factors and looking at an on-track graduation system. So we're analyzing academic data as well as social emotional learning data and learning how can we help these students in our daily lessons or in our curriculum or things like that. Those things were never taught. And I'm just thinking about how Sheldora said, like, yeah, we are not taught how to interact with each other, or co-teach or collaborate or have those hard conversations. But all of that happens in a professional learning community, or a lot of it happens in a PLC.
I can't help but wonder too, Casey, if before a student teaching experiences, when you're going out in the field for different observations, that part of that is observing different types of collaborations of teachers, not just going in the classrooms and observing, which obviously is very important, but like sitting in on a teacher leaders meeting or sitting in on a subcommittee meeting that a district is running for an initiative, or going to a professional development with, a grade level or a content area to see how they collaborate and talk and work together. I think that would at least start to give the snapshots of what those look like. I would argue that, the last 20 years, communication has changed so much too. I know I see in our newer teachers in our buildings, even when we're in professional development or in meetings, that they often are quiet. They will not share their feelings. When I talk to them one-on-one later, I will, I'm like, you have a voice, you should be sharing it. These things are important. But I think the way that we communicate and in those moments feels intimidating. And if you're giving pre-service teachers as many opportunities to experience a myriad of ways outside of just what it looks like in the classroom to communicate and to work, that will start to give them the lens of how to use their voice. I know for myself, that took me many years. I was not a person that was had the confidence to do that. And it took forcing myself to put myself in those positions. But I think if I'd had other experiences leading to that, where I was seeing snapshots of what it looked like to interact with your colleagues, or even have your colleagues come and watch you teach, which I know, is something that's often intimidating to teachers as well, even though it shouldn't be. It's like the greatest learning experience ever, but just providing other opportunities other than just classroom observations.
I would suggest something that can be done in the pre-service classes, and maybe there's a lot happening already, but in my 30-year career, the best way I learned how to be a co-teacher and collaborate with others is during the late 90s, early 2000s, when team teaching was a thing. And we did multidisciplinary every day. The paper, your informational essay you're writing in social studies was also used by the English teacher for some grammar instruction and grading in that way. So the multidisciplinary lesson plans. And then back to what Casey started with, I sought feedback from 5 teachers in my current building who are at 4 years or less before I came to this meeting. So I have a list of 20 things that they gave me, but one of them right from my list is how to use data to drive my lesson plans. Like, I really don't get this. And so I thought that was an interesting thing that Casey brought up.
I think including in all this would be something with a conflict resolution, because there's going to be conflict. You're going to have conflict with your colleagues. You're going to have conflict with students. You're going to have conflict with parents, with administrators, and learning how to handle that in a professional manner is important, because it's unavoidable. It's going to be there. So how do we handle it? And going back to what we said earlier, using simulations with that to give them some experience and practice at how to handle those types of situations is very important.
Sally Ray.
Thank you. Jennifer, I wonder if I'm just going in a very positive way. My brain is just going great with all of these ideas. This has been, sometimes you have people come into these meetings or a meeting and they have some good ideas, and good, we feel good, we're doing that in our school. But these are things that I'm pretty much promising a whole lot of us aren't doing. We're doing some of this, but this is new. And we have 4 one credit seminars that we run to take care of some of the certification pieces and some of the things that we don't put in to a curricular piece in the classroom. That's more academically driven. It's more the soft skills pieces. I'm loaded with, you rewrote my senior sem right there, and probably part of my junior sem, with some very practical things. So thank you, first of all, for your honesty, for your openness, for winning. Congratulations. But also I'd like to see, Jennifer, how, I don't know what the next step would be, but man, I think that this is amazing for us in higher ed to have a reality check of there's so much more that we have to be doing than aligning with standards and meeting this and meeting that, which is true. But there's so many pieces of it that we're not sending our students out knowing. And this is clearly from you all, that we might be sending out dynamic educators, but they're just certain pieces of day in, day out that we're not sharing. And, I'd love to see this go further. I'd love to have you all come to, a half day, something that we host, or I don't know what it is, but y'all are just scratching the surface of what you can provide us with. And I'd like to spend some more time with you, whether we do it through this organization or not, just doing a follow-up to say, hey, okay, what did you mean by this? How do you see this really working? Give me some practical pieces. We have a seminar that meets once a week for 15 weeks. So how do we tie all that in? I mean, you've got 2 years worth of work right here that you've given us of working with some of our students.
Sally Ray, I have a question. Do you,
Yeah.
or do any of the higher ed institutions invite their graduates that have been out in 1, 2, or 3 years to come back to give feedback? And if that is the case, which I'm sure it is, do you think those new teachers really are 100% open and honest as we are with the institution that they graduated from? And then,
here's the struggle I have with that, is that we have an alumni panel that comes back. Yep. And we have a diverse ages of how long they've been teaching. What their fear is not to be honest, but they don't want to turn these student teachers off from going in the field. Right? I mean, there's so much going on surrounding it. Everybody's saying, don't teach, don't teach. We've got some of the best teachers in the state, all over this state. I mean, and so when we have the alumni come back in, I'd love to find a way, Teresa, to see how we could get them more open and honest, and to direct it around some of these things would be awesome. It's more of a preparation than a fear.
Yeah, and like I said, though, I just asked for feedback from these 4 teachers in my building. I have a list of 20 things that they told me. So I
love them.
And I wonder, you know, I just wonder who else. I asked, you know, do you give this feedback? And each one of them said, well, I had this favorite professor and I stay in touch with that person and I've told that person. But, you know, I don't know that it goes from there. I don't know that they've ever done it in a formal way.
So Sally,
that's a great follow-up piece.
We work really closely with Mde Updates, who's on this call, and she invites the R Toys and the M Toy every year to come and talk to the teacher candidates, which they're doing soon. That might be another way for you at Siena Heights to do that, to have them come in, and it's virtually, but a panel to give feedback like this. And Mindy is great to work with, and I'm sure she'll give you all of the insights that you would need to know if you wanted to go that way.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Well, and I would say too, Jennifer, with working with CMU, because I also provided a keynote to them for their conference and did some live Q&A with their teachers, is that she did not want me to shy away from the complexities of what this field is. And I like to call my own perceptions of education, you know, really a complicated love story. There's so many things that are so beautiful, but also so many incredible challenges. But if you know those and you have people around you that can support you, you know, I do believe that we will come out of this and the challenges that we're facing better and stronger. But I think that piece is critical, is that teachers do need to come into this profession eyes wide open in terms of, you know, all the things that are amazing and wonderful about it, because people are going into education because they have that passion and drive to, you know, really you have the impact to change lives every day in this field. What other job can you really say you can do that in? But, you know, understanding that it is a complex time and a challenging time, any time would be, but now more than ever, at least the eyes are open to know what to expect and how to face those challenges.
Yep. I just like the disposition of it being, you know, coming from the angle of it's preparation. You know, it's not necessarily let's scare them away from it, but man, let's get you prepared so when you go in there, you're ready. Even in these areas, we feel like we've got them ready in some other areas, but yeah. Thank you so much, you guys.
Okay, Marcia.
Sorry, trying to unmute. I want to echo the thank you on this. I also want to put out a resource. Many of the universities here use a product called Go React, which allows for videotaping in the classroom. And early on, some people were talking about not being able to get the release time to go and do an observation. But as universities, we can extend guest privileges on some of our Go React contracts. And so if you want, your teachers could record themselves and then the two of you could sit down together and look at those recordings or like that. And it's a reasonably priced software and it's easy to use and like that. And a lot of us are using it in our teacher ed programs. And so please do reach out to us also, because we're not using it right now for the work with mentoring beginning teachers, first and second year teachers. We're using it in our teacher ed programs, but you're giving so much to us. This is something that we can also share with you, or some of these technologies that might make some of the mentoring projects that you're doing a little bit easier. It doesn't buy you the extra time to do it, but it gives you a tool for doing it that, like I said, I know a lot of us on this call use Go React, and would be glad to work with you. And when we've got interns there, or just because our alumni are going to you, it would be a reason for us to extend some of those licenses too.
Thanks, Marcia. Good idea. Paula?
Thank you. Again, like everyone else has said, this has been such an amazing conversation and discussion. So thank you so much for your input. Like everyone else, my mind is kind of swirling a bit too. But one thing that I think about a lot with beginner teachers is the expectations that we have for them as beginning in their profession. And I think all of our programs, I'm not sure how aware you all are about this, but all of our programs are going under extensive revision as we prepare for changes in the certification structure. So we're all having these conversations about how to balance the various needs of beginner teachers. And, some of those debates and conversations are around how much subject matter or content do they need? How much do we focus on pedagogy? How much do we focus on the collaborative skills and the family outreach and those types of things that you all are mentioning? And it does make me wonder a lot about the value in our profession to having a really extensive and a little bit more precise conversation about what do we really feel is critical, our critical knowledge, skills, dispositions for beginner teachers to have as they leave and are entering their first year of teaching, and what can they learn on the job? Because I don't think we're as clear about that as possible. And then sometimes that creates such heavy expectations for those first year teachers. What I love about this conversation and the questions that you're asking those beginner teachers or even those student teachers is I think it is getting at the actual, what do they really need to know and be able to do in that first year and what can come later? And you're helping them to surface those, this would have been critical. Maybe some of this other stuff could come later. And I don't know how to maybe have that conversation, but I just wonder what you all think about the value in really getting to some clarity about what those expectations are. Because I think they feel like they have to be perfect from the get-go, and we know that that's just not the case. So I just wonder what you think about that.
Paula, as you were talking, I was thinking about some of the things that I felt well prepared for. I mean, it definitely depends on, as an elementary teacher, I had 2 minors and had my certification in language arts and math. And so I had a lot of experience in those 2 things, but then I was not as strong in science and social studies, and my fieldwork did great. But it was more of having the ability of applying that cross-curricular aspect. And I didn't have as much of that within my teacher prep program. I also was thinking about, even within my own district now and what I see teachers old and new, there's a lack of understanding of how you teach writing. I think there's a huge understanding and a huge focus of the steps of reading progression, but there's not as much of a focus on those steps of writing progression. And we're seeing that in our MSTEP scores when it comes to those writing responses. And so even teachers now that have been teaching for 25 years, they are uncomfortable teaching writing because it's never been taught to them. And then there are not a lot of writing programs out there that are comprehensive. So I think that writing piece is huge. That could be really developed in teacher prep programs, as well as having the ability or having the experience or those skills of being able to apply writing or reading to science, social studies, or apply social studies to math or science to math, and having those cross-curricular things. Because when you're in a self-contained classroom, I haven't been there for a few years now, but I do remember how hard it is to fit everything in that you need to fit in one day. And having a set time for social studies, math, science, English, it just doesn't work. You have to be able to thread those things throughout. But I didn't have a lot of experience that in the teacher prep programs.
Thank you for that question, Dr. Lancaster. We are almost at time, so I wanted to take a minute to thank everybody for allowing us to be here, and we are more than happy to come back at any time to discuss anything else or invite the Archways to have discussions. We're more than happy to have them go out and meet with any of you. I do want to take 1 second to thank Dr. Lubig for his assistance with the RRU unit. Recently, he was a rock star, so I want to make sure that everyone is aware of that. And then also to the people from Grand Valley on this call, I want to thank you because my goddaughter is a freshman there and she's going to be a special ed teacher and she has a 4.0. So she is enjoying her time, and I hope that you guys will make her the best teacher that she can be. So thank you for having us here and we appreciate the time. Thank you,
Thank you,
Toys.
everybody. Yeah, that was really great. We really appreciate it. Give us a lot to think about. I'm gonna recommend a slight change. I know we put the break after the MDE updates, but I'm wondering if we may need that break now and then do MDE updates and go into our breakouts. Anybody opposed to a break now? Okay, all right. So we're gonna move our break up. We'll take about 10 minutes, refresh your beverages, and then we'll be back. Is that okay, Gina? Okay, and then we'll be back and MDE will present. Thank you, everybody. I'm seeing it pop up. Thank you, Brian. Okay, we're ready for some MDE updates. Not sure who's starting.
I think we're not sure who's starting either. I'll start us out and get us to the next couple of slides. We wanted to start out by reminding you all that we have multiple ways for you to interact with us on social media. We are putting out announcements and different things that go out for educators and for our teacher educators. So make sure that you're following us on the various social media platforms. And also make sure that you catch up with our DARTEP, or the DARTEP update. We've included a lot of updates in there for you and tried to make sure that we keep things really going in the DARTEP update. So lots of your questions can be answered in there. Make sure you check that out as well. And so as you met earlier, we want to welcome Alam. She is our new education consultant with the prep unit. Alam, if you would like to say a couple of words, if you're back.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Gina. Yes, I joined the Office of Educator Excellence at MDE last week of December. Quite excited, quite honored to be working among such amazing professionals, very team oriented. I look forward to working with all of our EPIs and representatives and responding to questions, inquiries, providing support that I can. I am, as you'll probably read through the introduction, sorry it's not long, but it provides the areas that I oversee. And thank you, Gina. I won't take up any more time. Thank you. And I'm enjoying our work together immensely.
We're very happy to have Alam on our team. So welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we've come to legislative updates. And I believe Leah is taking this one.
I am, thank you. And I think I was supposed to do the first part too. I'm having terrible technical difficulties. I apologize, Gina.
No
Thank
worries.
you.
Happy to step in.
Okay, so hello, everybody. I haven't spoken with some of you for a very long time. It's nice to see and hear some faces. I only got excerpts of this morning's meeting, unfortunately. I'm hopeful to watch it all on the recording so I can hear all of the conversation from our regional teachers of the year. I think it sounded very interesting. So legislative update. As you all know, because I believe Superintendent Rice was here to speak with you at the last meeting, perhaps, he has proposed a call for an investment of 300 to 500 million over 5 years This number is actually closer to $1 billion if you take into consideration all of the recommendations that were in the communication. The 300 to 500 million are the top prioritized recommendations. It is the first step to recruiting and retaining sufficient numbers of high quality educators. There was a focus on recruitment of educators in this particular request. We have gotten some pushback from veteran educators in the field that want to know what we are doing in support of retention of teachers. Very legitimate question. We know retention is a problem and we need to encourage our educators to stay in the workforce. So that also needs to be addressed, certainly, and we'll encourage that in the future as well. So it looks like the legislature is leaning towards some funding for grow your own programs. These would allow employees that are currently in schools, I think is where they're headed, to work toward certification. We have an announcement that was just released about the first wave of this funding, which is a small amount, and we expect more in the next budget. We are encouraging and prioritizing awardees that have partners with higher education institutions to receive the funding. So consider reaching out to your K-12 partners, asking them how you might be able to support the Grow Your Own efforts and the grants that are being issued in their school. So there is a call for legislative action to let educators, teachers, building administrators focus exclusively on the needs of children this year, rather than the enormously time-consuming and less impactful educator evaluations. There have been requests from the Department of Education to the legislature to minimally set aside the student growth and student achievement components of educator evaluation, but more intensively to eliminate the state requirements for educator evaluation altogether and return it to the district for implementation. So there's an opportunity to lend your voices to this if this is an area of interest for you. Student teacher bill. So I heard parts of this conversation earlier. I wish I would have heard all of the parts of conversation. You know that this bill is out there. It was just introduced. It was a very rapid turnaround for testimony. I saw that there was some outreach to all of you essentially 24 hours before it went to committee for hearing, which didn't allow for a lot of thinking time on testimony. The MDE did oppose the bill in the initial committee. There was some frustration expressed by committee members that we did not provide the rationale for that opposition. Again, we did not really have time to provide the rationale for that opposition. I did help draft a considerable number of speaking points in response, which I'm trying to grab right now. And because of my technical difficulties, I may not be able to do so. But so I'll try and give the salient points. We, like you, supported the idea that student teachers need to be supported, and it is not a good idea to put them in positions as full-time paid teachers without supports for them to be successful, that it could result in actually decreasing the population because students may think that this profession is not for them, or they are not prepared to enter the profession without those supports. We provided several language opportunities for them to revisit the bill and make amendments. I think that you do know that MDE has been a supporter of paying student teachers in the past, but we have not put forward any support of paying student teachers and leaving them alone without the supports necessary to be successful. So that, I think, is a very important point, and that was really the emphasis in our letter, as well as requiring them to have substitute permits, because this particular bill allowed them to student teach without substitute teaching permits. And there are a number of school safety issues that are important. And we want everybody that are serving as a teacher of record with students to have permits or certificates. And I'm hopeful that you should see MDE's response soon to the legislation on this bill. Oh, you probably are aware of this one as well, that anybody who is an employee at a school or works at a school may serve as a substitute teacher for the rest of the year with a high school diploma or equivalency. So this is a contracted substitute through an agency. If they are working at the school, they do not need to have a permit for the rest of this year, and they do not need anything greater than a high school diploma. And there are a number of bills around eliminating the requirements for permits and reducing the requirements for substitute teachers currently in the legislature. Okay, that's our update for now.
Thank you, Leah. Good morning. For those I haven't had a chance to meet yet, I am Jason Kalmbach with MDE, specifically the Data and Accountability Unit. For all intents and purposes, I am the caretaker of the EPI performance score. It looks like releasing the 2022 score sometime in early March, but we want to give you a quick overview of the scoring components because the scoring format is new this year. Hopefully this slide is somewhat familiar to you. 2018, 2019, right, we started that process of redesigning the performance score. We gave folks an overview of this method in May 2021 via webinar. These are the categories and indicators for the performance score with a brief nod on the right of the chart to the types of data measuring an indicator. For 2022, it's a lot of survey. A lot of the score is still surveys, MTTC data, educator effectiveness ratings, slightly rearranged or measured differently than before. The indicators in regular font here will be part of the 2020 EPI performance score. The indicators and data in red will not be included in 2022. We are still developing details about how to phase those metrics into the score. If you would like more details on these metrics, we have a manual that we sent out in May that will get into more detail. These indicators are measured. I'll draw my email in the chat and just note if you would get the email or you would like the email resent to you. And then I think we're ready for the next slide. I don't know who's controlling the PowerPoint, the presentation, but.
You did change it. It might be delayed on your end.
Delayed on my end? Okay. I did get a connection that my internet is unstable, so I apologize if I'm coming in sort of a bunch of jargon. So on those the remaining indicators, the updates, they're the candidate and completer diversity rating. We had some focus groups in September, 2 focus groups to talk about how to collect this data from. This would be a new data collection. Internally, we're discussing the best way to do that. We are trying to balance what is an accurate way, what method will give us accurate data, but at the same time will be least burdensome on the EPI. So we're still having internal discussions there. The common observation tool, we also had 2 focus groups in September. During that conversation, those focus groups, maybe it kind of reaffirmed the idea that there is some interest in the EPIs amongst developing or using a common observation tool during the students' clinical experiences. But there was a lot of, desire for details. What is this actually? The devil's always in the details. So we do have a meeting later today at 1 o'clock to talk specifically about CPAS. We have been in discussions with Ohio State University what CPAS would look like, and we want to share that with you today. And that's just to start a conversation. If everybody doesn't like CPAS, and we'll go back to the drawing board, but we'll get your reactions to CPAS. And basically, I think our intent is to give you the information, let you go back to your group, go back to your faculty, have a conversation about it. Our intent is to have a conversation later at Hope, when there's that Hope conference, just to talk about it in a little bit more depth and gather your feedback about what you all think about possibly using CPAS. That email went to, I think, everybody on the deans and directors list. We are trying to limit it to 1 representative from each EPI. I think we got everybody except 5 EPIs that were signed up. But Liza, Chris sent the link earlier today if you are registered. I can't remember, but Chris, the link for connection information today. If you didn't get it, just shoot me an email and I can resend it to you. So we'll take care of that at 1 o'clock today. And then the administrator survey, we piloted data for the first time for the 2021 school year, just piloting the data, see what the survey responses look like. We had a 41.3% response rate, a little bit better than I think we were hoping. And then our intent is to include the administrator survey in the 2023 EPI performance score. And then the K through 12 student perceptions, there was a desire to maybe get what students think of their first year, second year teachers who are early in their career. That's to be determined. We're trying to take care of some of the lower hanging fruit first, and then we'll circle back to student perceptions and see if there's a efficient, cost-effective way to go ahead and gather that data from students. So that's the update on the remaining indicators. So ready for the next slide. Maybe there's a lag again. I think my computer is trying to fade to the next slide. So a reminder on the surveys, the candidate survey suites for the fall for this academic year 21-22. The fall surveys went out in mid-November. Just a reminder that the collection closes on February 13th. You can see the response rates there in the PowerPoint slide. A reminder that if you kind of remember the new method, that new method does include response rates. So we are trying to reemphasize to programs to check your response rates. You can do that through that link that you see there. We set up a dashboard for everyone in Qualtrics. If you need any assistance logging in or whatnot, just shoot me an email. Dean will also be able to help you out. Since our December meeting, we were able to allow you to download in Excel list of people who have responded to your survey, so you can just cross-reference that rosters that you gave Dana in early November, and that can help you set up any reminders if you want to sort of remind your students or your supervisors or your cooperating teachers to, yes, please answer the survey. And we can go to the next slide, which is just a QR code for that particular link to the dashboard. March will be 1 year for me at MDE, and the one thing I've learned is that a lot of folks seem to like QR codes here. So there's a QR code if that's easier for you to access the dashboard. And then we can probably move forward to the next slide. So a reminder for the spring and summer surveys plus the year out survey, those will be distributed in mid-March. So the next round of surveys. For the candidate suites, Dana, sometime around mid-February, will start sending out the usual roster requests to you to let us know who we should send the survey to. We usually try to keep about a 90-day window open for the survey. So the anticipated close date for the survey will be June 12th this year. And then next slide. And then a reminder, I guess it made me more note on survey word change. Right now, one of the things MDE is working on, we're working with alternative route providers to develop their performance management score. When talking about the surveys, specifically the administrator survey in general, there was some concern about this particular question wording. So this is a question that just on the surveys that the candidate survey suite that's on that one, but it's also on the year out survey. It's also on the administrator survey, just asking about how well teachers are prepared to deal with and interact with gifted and talented students. There were some concerns about whether gifted and talented students means the same thing to every survey respondent, and maybe some different language might be appropriate. They proposed high-performing students instead of gifted and students on the survey question. I think internally, MDE, we agree with
Looks like Jason might have frozen, so I'm going to step in because I know we're tight on time. Internally, MDE did agree with that language suggestion. It is one of our questions that has the highest, oh, it's really pushing us through. Okay, that had the highest not applicable or no opportunity to observe. And we think that might be because that language is often tied to some funding in a very specific category of students. And I think the original intent when we were trying to develop the survey was really getting at more of that high performing students. This should be the last change we make to the surveys in any capacity. It will be changed in the year out and admin surveys for the spring because that's only sent in the spring. And then we will change it to the candidate suite surveys. So those three, the student teacher, cooperating teacher, and mentor teacher. Supervisor in the fall. And then the surveys are locked for hopefully a long time. Outside of that, we just wanted to send a quick reminder that Title II had a vendor up change. They have not been the best at being communicative around Title II changes. So we sincerely apologize, but we are trying to give you any info we have. So if there's nothing from us, it's because we have heard nothing from them. but they are now partnered with Truon and RTI. So communications will generally come from this email at rti.org. We suggest you make sure you're not accidentally screening or blocking them. With this transition, it caused all accounts to be inactivated. We tried to go through and reactivate them, but please, let us know or reach out to RTI if you either need somebody added to your account or you're struggling to gain access. And then we just finalized our report for the old, I think 2021 year. So that data should ideally be getting posted in February or early March.
And thank you for covering. Kate, I think I have everybody reactivated unless I missed someone. So if you try to log in and you get a message that your account isn't active, I missed your checkbox somehow. So just shoot me an email. I'll get you taken care of.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to talk a little bit about our Future Proud Michigan Educator grants. My name is Holly Carruthers, and I'm working with the Recruitment and Recognition Unit at OE right now. So I'm here to let you know about 2 current live grant opportunities that could impact some of your programs. The first one has been really getting a lot of traction lately, and you might be getting inquiries already. And if you haven't, you might expect some to come. This is a tuition and program fees grant for candidates who are seeking initial certification or additional endorsements. And the districts themselves are the applicants, but they can apply for up to $10,000 per candidate to grow their own from their current existing school staff. And that includes anyone who's working on a long-term substitute permit that may technically be employed by a third-party staffing company, but is working in the school. And so we have a lot of schools that are calling about their paraprofessionals or about teachers trying to fill positions with current teachers who need an additional endorsement. And I'm getting a lot of questions about where they can go to do that. And so I have been sending them the information about all of our Michigan approved preparation providers. But now would be a great time if you have existing relationships with districts to talk with them about what you can offer. And it also would be a great time if you can do any kind of media push about what programs you have to offer that would be of interest to these particular candidates, keeping in mind that these are working professionals and they're working in schools. So they are often interested in alt route, residency models, expedited models, but there's no time limits to when they need to complete their program. So there are some candidates who are also looking to begin a full initial teacher certification program. The other grant that we have is an extension of our Explore grants from last year. We had a lot of really good interest in those, but what we learned from that grant process was that there were some foundational materials that needed to go into effect in advance. In particular, establishing a teacher who might be interested in teaching a course and training that teacher, gathering some recruitment and student interest for the course at the high school level that will translate to more recruitment opportunities for future teachers. And so what we've done here is we've offered up what we're calling a micro grant, and it's a small grant per school where the grantees can train their teacher with our free professional learning that is generally about educator preparation, early career teaching, and mentorship. They can begin an after school or out of school time club, and then they can also bring their students to an educator prep institution. Both of these grants that currently exist are on a fairly short timeline, and the funds need to be spent by the end of August. So if you have opportunities to get your feeder schools onto campus, or if you have relationships with schools that you would like to enhance for teacher recruitment and grow your own purposes, now is a great time to reach out. The grants are open currently and are not due until March 18th. So if you have any questions about either of those grants, Sean Kotke and I are coordinating them together, and I can be your first point of contact for you or any of your partners who would like to talk more about this opportunity. Now's the time to ask questions, but I don't know where we're at in the schedule, so we may not have time for questions.
I'm muted. So yes, I think we're right there at the agenda. We will do a wrap up at the end if there is questions, unless there's something really burning right at the moment.
There's one in the chat, and the question was about who's eligible as an applicant. This is for LEAs, public school academies, and ISDs, not available to private or independent schools at this time.
Okay, thank you. I missed that. Okay, it's time for, so next on the agenda, we are going to combine our job alikes and our work with Mitten. So I wanted to I'm going to introduce Sean Lancaster from Mitten, and he has his team. I'll let Sean introduce his team. And then what we're going to do is just kind of, if Sean doesn't mind, do a brief background of Mitten and its purpose and a reminder of the core practices and why they're so important. And then Brian has our breakout groups that he'll pop up when it's time, and we'll have to pick the ones to join. So our intention is that, the assessment group is going to talk about how are we going to measure these? How are we measuring the core practices in our programs? The deans and directors are going to talk about how do we train our faculty? How do we implement and scaffold these across our programs? And the clinical placement coordinator group is going to discuss, how do we bridge that gap between P12 and our teacher preparation for the core practices, and how are we implementing those in our clinicals? And then certification officers, right now we're going to let you choose which of those three you would like to participate in. And then we'll open up your breakout so that certification officers can then go into their own breakout room to discuss. We know you have important things to discuss as well, so we wanted to provide you at that time. If there is no questions, I'm going to hand it off to Sean Lancaster.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. I'm Sean Lancaster, and I'm a professor of education at Grand Valley State University. And I am part of Mitten. And today I have Kevin Cunningham from Central Michigan University. He's a faculty member in teacher education. Paula Lancaster is the dean of education and human services at Central Michigan, and she's also with us today. And so is Corey Drake she's a faculty member at Michigan State University. And Mitten is the Michigan Teacher Education Network. And this is an organization we created that emerged from the Michigan Program Network, which was an organization that Deborah Ball at the University of Michigan funded originally to focus on core teaching practices and a practice-based approach to teacher education. And we came together in 2015 and started working on the core teaching practices, vetting them, getting them into digestible chunks, creating curricular materials, and the MDE joined us. And eventually we have these 19 core teaching practices that everybody on this call is now implementing in the program. And I think I want to point out that the most important part of our Mitten is the N, because it's a network. And we had that with the Michigan Program Network as well, because we are so much stronger together, and we have to do this work together to even have a chance at the kind of fidelity that these practices need when they're being implemented into our program. So we are going to break out into different groups and talk about the fidelity of implementation. And I guess we can go to those groups now. But I should also say Mitten has programming that we've done for twice a month and then once a month on training around the practices and a focus on equity within the practices and disrupting patterns of inequity in classrooms and schools and even in our programs. And that work has been very productive, and you'll get a glimpse of it here in the breakout rooms.
Oh, okay. Paul asked a question. So yes, we're going to spend at least 45 minutes in the breakout room. And then we'll come back and process what we've discussed. Okay, I think we can, if we could share what our groups talked about. and report out. Don't know who would like to go first. I can talk about what we talked about in the assessment. First of all, I want to thank you for I want to thank Mitten for being here and helping us facilitate these conversations. I know there's a lot more work to be done, and this was just a really quick start to some of these conversations. I know the assessment group for sure, this is still going to be a challenge in how we're going to measure our candidates to ensure they have these skills. So we did talk about that. Dean Lancaster presented for us some ideas, like looking at what are some of the critical features of how we're going to measure this, and kind of dividing it up into two. So our candidate knowledge and candidate actual skill. So how are they actually performing those practices? Looking at pre-post testing options. What do we do that using video analysis, role plays, simulated student interactions, micro teaching, and how do we help them identify their strengths and areas for improvement? How are we giving that feedback to them as it's scaffolded through the program? Obviously, we probably need summative assessments, but it really is more about formative and how are we assisting them throughout the program. And Gina did say, CTP knowledge will be in the MTTC. It's going to be much more scenario based than it used to be for some of these MTTCs. So that's going to be a shift. And then also we talked a little bit about, for the assessment group, MDE, there's a program review that needs to be done prior to your self-study, 3 to 6 months. And Gina shared that quickly. And then we also want to encourage the accreditation conference we're going to hold on April 7th. And we'll come back and talk about these core practices and measuring the core practices and how you align that for what's needed for the state, what's needed for accreditation, and that type of thing. So did I hit everything, Paula, really quickly, or did I miss anything really important point?
No, I think that sounds like a very good recap. So thank you.
All right, well, I'll go next then, deans and directors. We started off by trying to surface some of the challenges that we face in thinking about the fidelity of implementation of the core teaching practices in our programs. And some of the big hitters are that we hire adjunct instructors who aren't trained and don't have a background on the core teaching practices, but we also have our own faculty, especially if you have multiple sections of a course. How do we handle one instructor who's all in and another instructor who's not? And they have to deal with the introduction phase and the preparation phase of a practice. And then I spent a little time sharing just how on Mitten we've worked on trying to provide resources around the implementation of building respectful relationship with students. And I had resources there that walk you through introduction and prepare, and how you use transcripts and video and different resources. And then we just had a general discussion after that of trying to help each other think about how you build the time around this work. And if I missed anything, feel free to fill in.
One thing that I was thinking about as we were talking and thinking about what we do at CMU, I feel, maybe Kim be still here, we do try and support those who are diving deep into the core teaching practices, and we are trying to create support materials for others. Another avenue, a way to think about this in our very full plate, is that as we have these materials, make them available and support them in using them, that maybe those fixed term faculty, those others who haven't jumped on board, that if that in turn creates a problem of practice, I think people, that's another inroad, right, as they implement it, and that becomes an avenue as they're trying to figure this out to get them to dive deeper into the core teaching practices. But that is another way to think about it, because whether it's PK-12, whether it's higher ed faculty, when it's related to what they do every day and in the classroom, and they can see that relationship, I think they're much more likely to sort of dive in and problem solve with others.
I will report out for the clinical placement coordinators. So Corey Drake from MSU and from Mitten shared with us what they are doing in Mitten and some of the practices from GVSU and Oakland, and that Mitten is currently working to support systemic change in the Michigan EPP and with practicing teachers, those CTs and mentors that we all work with. And they're currently meeting virtually. And we did share the Mitten link as well as Corey's email in our notes for anyone who wants to join, because it is an open invitation to anyone who wants to participate to better the practice of teaching and preparing our candidates. Previously, Mitten was working on helping to promote race and gender in the classrooms and provide that equity, but now they're focusing on the problems of practice, especially in relation to the core teaching practices. And this past summer, CMU hosted workshops on building respectful relationships, modeling content, and eliciting student thinking. And they worked with candidates as well as teachers in practice on understanding practices for the core teaching practices and taking on roles in their home-based schools to work with those teacher candidates and identifying different artifacts that might be helpful, which could be those videos or, kind of how-tos or guidebooks and that sort of thing. And Oakland has been very helpful in building out a set of tools, the guidebook and the rubric, et cetera, around those core teaching practices to provide to the CTs and the mentor teachers. The big question is bridging the gap, what's working and how they're meeting the challenges, making sure that what's being learned in the EPP by the teacher candidates is also what they're learning and using in their clinical hour placement sites, because there's a disconnect between what we're seeing as core teaching practices and what those clinical teachers might be using or calling it. It could be vocabulary, but it could also be a focus on utilizing those in the classrooms. And so there's this constant question of what are the needs? Are there some assessments that need to be developed? Are there rubrics? Are there videos? Is there a curriculum for the education, the EPP, or curriculum for the CTs and the mentors? And then how does Mitten or the associated EPPs incentivize for the CTs and the mentors to participate in all of this? Some of the institutions have some financial wherewithal to make some stipends available. The biggest question though is time. So there's been some summer work or some shorter sessions, virtual sessions, certainly. But it's also focusing on those core teaching practices as the main work. And we also moved into sketches for CT and mentors. There's some frustration at the EPPs because a lot of that has been directed toward the districts providing it. And so there's an uneven amount of sketches being awarded when there is a CT being a mentor teacher. So a lot of the institutions would prefer to just handle their own awards for sketches and turn that into the states, especially the bigger institutions, just because there's a disparity in what's being awarded there. There has been some recomposition for CT and mentor handbooks and the hosts of schools by Grand Valley and some of the other institutions. And some of the unique solutions to the challenges of clinical placements during our pandemic have been that there are more and more interns being hired without consultation with the EPP and the placement school, that it's kind of going on behind the backs. The school approaches the student and asks, would they apply or be interested in the position? And then the EPP is placed in an awkward situation as to whether or not they want to allow that at the time. And then there's also been some challenge with program revisions and additional placements for the clinicals and also the minutia of getting all of the registered and required paperwork with some staffing shortages that everyone's facing due to the pandemic, and the overall labor force seems to be reduced. There has also been some conflicts with maintaining some partnerships because of the change in the grade bandings, but Oakland presented a unique approach to this and maintained that they have some team schools that they work with regularly and mentor teachers who are consistently on board, and that's been helpful in having them find their placements. And they also reiterated the problem with paperwork and their staffing shortages at their university as well.
So if you like, I can report out for certification officers. So for our job alike, the certification officers were a little quiet, a little more quiet than usual. And but we opened up with talking about the alternative route endorsement programs, what EPIs might offer that. We briefly talked about our sketch coordinators. Is that a different role at the college, or is the sketch coordinator also kind of like working as a certification officer and things like that? And at different colleges, it was determined that the sketch coordinator is typically a different person from the certification officer. Something came up about MOEX issues with when using it under Firefox. There's some sort of autofill that's going on when you choose to save your password. And again, any other certification officers, if I am forgetting anything, please feel free to jump in. We discussed, the grade band. If a student, after they finish, they're kind of like that new grade band and, they pass the test, but they also finished the curriculum and the test under the ZS endorsement, could they still add it? And I believe the consensus was yes, they could still do that, but I wasn't quite sure on that answer. We also talked about evaluation systems, possibly doing another training in the future, and that if EPIs had any input regarding what topics they want to discuss. Are we going to look at more of training about reports, results analyzer, or do we just want to have an open discussion? There was also an issue with the verification rosters. As my understanding, there's one roster for traditional test takers and one roster for alternative route. But for some reason, some of the alternative route test takers were showing up on the traditional route, and they would indicate, yes, I'm in an alternative route program. So there was concern about being able to capture those pass rates or whatnot, or if we lost those students. So if I'm incorrect on that, please correct me. We talked about the MTTC vouchers, the cost for testing and doubling up. And we talked about somebody coming in for as a new certification officer, for example, and if they have a special education administrator authorization, being able to get kind of like notified through MOEX that these authorizations are sitting in MOEX. And we discussed that we don't get a notification whenever there's a new application added to MOEX. That's just something we have to check daily or periodically during the day. If I missed anything, guys, please feel free to join in or correct me on anything. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody. Again, I want to thank Mitten for being here, and of course, our regional teachers of the year, and Jennifer, and her team. I already have ideas of how we can include them here at CMU. That was a very beneficial discussion. Yes, thank you to Brian, who organizes us and does all our technology and all this work behind the scenes. I'm going to say
Hey, Jennifer.
Yep.
This is Sally Ray. Can I chime in just one?
Sure.
One baby step here. After all the years that we've been doing this, I think today was a realization for me how important our connections are. When these new teachers, these teachers of the year came and talked to us, what they had to share is crazy important for us to realize that we're all going to go through different seasons in life, right? Different stages of our education career, our personal lives, but the relationships that we make along the way are the things that absolutely keep us going through the different seasons. And so I just would encourage everybody that to have 120 plus people at this meeting is great. And for a state organization to have this many people is awesome. So I thank everybody for keeping the relationships going and keeping the understanding of the connections that we have to have to make this thing work in this state. We really do have a different relationship than most state organizations have with their MDEs, with their departments of ed. And I just thank the MDE staff for allowing us to be a part of your world and being a part of our world as well. But man, in this season right now, you guys, it's a crazy season. So let's make sure that we're staying connected. Jennifer, you did a great job with the meeting today. And I just wanted to just make sure everybody keeps connections going. That's all.
Thank you, Sally. It was perfect. Well, on that note, on that beautiful, well said note, thank you everybody for being here today and have a good weekend. We'll see you in April.